Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
I don't know what was going on there, but
You were pulling a Kyle.
yeah, man, I don't know. The ghost of him sticks with us even now, so.
Perfect.
All right, everyone. Yeah, I was learning how to create an event. That way we can actually have these advertised ahead of time in Discord. So, appreciate all of you joining us here today. I'm sure we'll have a few more folks that trickle in as we progress through the next hour or so, but if anyone has any questions, remember there are two ways that you can get those questions in. You can type them in chat, and we're more than happy to read them out. Or you can raise your hand. There should be a nifty little option. I believe if you click the little button down below or right click on your profile, there'll be an option to raise your hand. If I see someone has raised their hand, we'll invite you up here on the stage and you can ask Hunter your question in real time. Just remember, this is going to be an on-demand recording for other people who are watching it after the fact in the Chaser Academy. So take that into consideration if you wish to not be perceived as I know some people do. Hunter, before we get started at answering any questions here, I have had a crazy day so far. Ask me why.
Why, Gabe? How has your day been?
So I'm sitting here doing work, getting everything prepared, thinking it's going to be a normal afternoon just like any other, and I get a call from my girlfriend. The building next to her apartment complex, or I guess her apartment building, exploded due to a natural gas leak. Like legit, when you see on the news like a building completely flattened.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, dude, not good at all. And they had to evacuate her building, and
Uh-huh.
all the people that were in it had to either take their animals with them, or if they got home after the fact, they weren't allowed to go in and get their animals because the building next door was on fire. They were worried about the gas leaking over into that building. So I had a really tense couple of hours wondering if her cat was going to make it or not because they weren't
Yeah.
letting anybody go over there and the flames were getting very close to hopping over to the building next door. And it's pretty crazy afternoon.
Yeah, that's rough.
Yeah. So
I'm glad they're okay. At least I hope everyone's okay.
yeah, I've never seen anything like that. The entire street was blocked off from end to end. There were
Hmm.
at least a couple dozen fire engines and police officers, tape around everything, and then the building is just completely decimated. Like exactly
Oh yeah.
what you think of when you see those on the news where like a building has a gas leak and then an explosion. So really nuts.
There actually was, I think it was maybe a year ago, maybe 2 years ago now, but a Ring camera actually caught a nearby house exploding from a gas thing. So yeah, no, the whole building just splinters. There's
Yeah,
nothing left
yeah.
of it.
Yeah, so we're actually waiting right now. We haven't heard anything. The building is a historical building. It's a
Hmm.
museum. We're waiting to hear if there was anyone working at the time when it happened. Like no
Ooh.
one knows anything yet. So I really hope that everybody's okay.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it's. I mean, you don't want to say hopefully because obviously natural gas explosion probably was due to negligence of some
Yeah,
kind.
right.
But you'd hope it's just someone, was in the guest or the break room and left the stove on and went home or something,
Yeah.
right?
Yep,
That's what you hope
absolutely.
for.
Definitely hope that's what it was. But yeah, I guess we'll find out soon enough. But yeah, she's not even allowed to go back tonight. They cut the power and the gas to the whole part of the street there until they figured out what was going on. So
Hmm. Wild. That's crazy.
So yeah, man. This is nice to just get. This is relaxing for me considering the tense evening that I just had. Okay,
Yeah.
so we got the first question coming in from Banglin. How's it going, man? Or woman? I guess I don't know. He says, or she says, I'm shooting myself in the foot here. They
They.
say,
They.
so on chase days, what are the first things that you do in the morning? Then later on, what are you looking at? So, very broad question, probably gives you a lot of space to answer this with some of your personal preferences, but we'll break it down into two parts. So, first of all, when you wake up in the morning, what is the first thing that you're looking at? And does that change if you are already in the target area versus if you actually have to do a significant amount of driving to the target area?
That's actually a good question because it does change. We'll say if I'm starting at my house and let's say I have to drive an appreciable distance anywhere from 2 to 4 hours east because I live in Denver, Colorado, so there's no chasing west of me, so I pretty much just have to drive I-70 eastward or I-75 to I-80 eastward. That means there's a little bit of a commitment involved, and that does mean if it's a really lower end day where it's kind of a toss up, I probably will just look at a real basic look of just my first thing I'll go to immediately is look at satellite, especially if it's the morning of. Um, when I say morning of, we'll say anywhere central time based, anywhere between 9 and 11 a.m. if it's roughly around that time frame. I'll immediately go look at satellite because I want to see, is there convective streams? Do I have storms in the area? Do I have heavy cloud cover? Because before I look at anything at the surface, I want to just get a really basic visual presentation of what's going on. That is just my personal preference. And my forecast process is generally a top-down perspective, because I am a meteorologist, so I like to get into the details of synoptics and more of the meteorology to find sources of potential lift, areas of suppression, where is the atmosphere kind of favoring things to work out aloft, and then working my way downward. So just naturally for me, an easy way to go there is just say, hey, let's look at satellite. Let's look at what the clouds look like. Are there any clouds? Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a bad thing. See if any visible features like a dry line or cold front is apparent, or if there's rapidly moving air streaming in aloft or near the ground. Those kind of things is what I look for to start. Then immediately after looking at satellite, I'll probably pull up a combination of pulling up the SBC because I like to hear what they have to say because they are other experts in the field. Not necessarily to choose my target, but again, it's always good to get more perspectives outside of your own narrow field of view, right? And then I'll go right to the surface pattern to look for surface boundaries, low pressures. What's my moisture looking like? Are my temperatures good? Is everything just super saturated and foggy, which obviously I would know from the satellite beforehand, but doubling it down with the surface pattern, what's it looking like? Is it nebulous or is it really obvious? Has it changed from the models I've looked at the night before? And I would say that's probably the initial route I would go if I was beginning my storm chase from my home and beginning to head out the door. If I'm already in a target area that I felt like, hey, the night before I drove to a spot, I'm at a hotel, I wake up anytime between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m., depending on the chase. If I know I have to drive far that next day, then obviously I'll wake up a little sooner. But generally, a little bit, I like to lollygag in the morning because I'm slow. So I will just kind of take my time. The first thing I'll look at is immediately the surface pattern because I just want to see, has anything obviously changed? Because I don't have to make the commitment because I'm already there. I don't have to go look at the satellite presentation, which I still will, but it won't be my first thing I go to because I just want to see, has anything changed from what models have already said? That's going to be the immediate first thing I'm going to do, and realize, hey, do I need to go drive another hour, 2 hours away, or can I just hang out in a Walmart parking lot and just relax and get sunburned until storms get going? So I'd say that's probably how my chase days kind of begin, depending on whether I'm at home or I'm already outside.
I'll throw a curveball at you here, Hunter. Kind of piggyback off of Brian Anglin's question. This is polarizing, I know, but do you
Oh, this
have
will be
any
good.
use for models on the day of the event? Because I'll
Absolutely.
be I was gonna say
Yeah.
I'll say right now Trey is like anti models on the day of the event. He's like, take your models and throw them out the freaking window. Don't
Uh-huh.
bother me with this stuff. But I know some
Yep.
people are like, hey, there's still some utility, especially in seeing what the shorter runs are giving as a consensus. So how do you handle that sort of situation?
I am very much like Trey, but not to as I think to the as extreme. I will check the 12Z her up until about the 15Z her, which for me, based off of just my personal chase style and experience with that model and all my chases, I generally view the 15Z her as the most accurate because it's had enough time to ingest not only the balloon launches that happen at 12Z, but it's had multiple runs to kind of iterate on that data as well as starting to pick up surface conditions as the morning is
Mm.
warming up. So generally it starts getting better in my opinion, but a really good rule of thumb is if you're on a chase day And if you're continuously watching the her model run to run to run, and it's 11 a.m., 12 p.m., 1 p.m., 2 p.m., that's not a good sign. Because
Yeah.
then that means that you're looking for something that might not be there, right? You're wish casting at that point. You're not actually looking at the meteorology. So I'm very much like Trey, where after a certain point in the morning, usually the 15Z model for me is the cutoff point. That I'll pretty much almost toss all models aside, and I'll move strictly to satellite, radar, surface-based mesoanalysis, and SBC mesoanalysis products, which still is a little bit wrap based, especially if you do any like hourly forecasting out. But generally, I'll be looking at primarily current observed weather data, whether it be my own eyes through satellite or and radar, or other things of like surface conditions, etc. So I don't think looking at a model the morning of is a bad thing. Knowing how models behave and knowing their we'll say shortcomings, which for you subscribers, go check out Kyle's or not Chase explain, but his
Training
lesson
module
on
for
training module.
forecast
Thank you.
models.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah. His forecast module on weather models, because sometimes they have really important uses out in the field. The HER will sometimes really struggle to form convection because it overmixes the boundary layer. That's not something that's going to exist in, say, a model like the 3cam NAM, which tends to be a lot cooler, doesn't have that mixing issue. But then, is the model too cool based off of what we actually see? So it's a lot of just checking, basically seeing, hey, does this actually look like what's actually happening out my window, right? Or is it completely in fantasy land? So I'd say I use models a little bit, but it's usually very initial when I'm getting my day of planning, and then once it's basically noon by lunchtime, I've basically stopped looking at models entirely, and it's purely basically what I can see with my eyes and understanding what is the meteorology doing at that time. But that's because I just personally have that expertise in using models and the meteorology background to do that, which might be tough for some people, especially for initial people here with Storm Chaser coaching, learning how to get better at this. But like anything, it's repetition. The more you work with the data, the more you learn, the more times you practice with using it, the more it becomes familiar. And when you're out in the middle of nowhere, banking a lot of money on being, trying to see a storm, being out in the middle of nowhere, it comes in handy. So
Right on. And the Hemolyzer 3000, Jen Kushner. That's quite a name, Jen. She says, I don't have anything really intelligent to add, which I disagree wholeheartedly. But I'm asking for suggestions for reading material to put on my holiday list. Do you have any meteorology or other books that you would recommend for Jen to put on her holiday list?
ooh, okay. So if you're looking for a scientific thing, I can recommend lots of scientific journals for you. But if you're looking for something not traditional that route, um, I'd say one of my favorite books that I've actually read recently that was meteorology related was the book written by, um, oh, I am going to blank on his name. But anyways, it's the book about Tim Samaras and reading his life story and whatnot. I actually just finished rereading the book recently. Highly recommend it if you've never read it. Just Tim Samaras is definitely a major idol of mine, and I had the pleasure of meeting him many years ago. And I really look up to him in his pursuit of the science, not just the seeing the cool weather, but actually trying to understand and chase the science in meteorology and actively trying to study tornadoes is something that really appealed to me. So I usually try to reread the book every once in a while because, again, he's just a huge inspiration to me. And there's lots of good meteorology, but also the story of his life as well. So I think it's a really great book
The man who
as well.
caught the storm?
Yes,
Okay. I was looking it up there. Yeah,
great book.
that
Great book.
I've heard a lot of people mention that one. So, Jen, that would probably be a pretty good one to put on your list. And if you have already read that one, I would say go ahead and read all of Cameron Nixon's PDFs. If you reach out to him, he's more than happy to send them your way. So,
I would agree. Cameron has lots of amazing info.
yep, absolutely. All right. Weaponized Autism asks, what color should I paint my walls? I don't know, man.
Beige.
I don't know. Beige. There we go. Hannah asks, I apologize if this has already been asked. Well, we're just starting out here, so it has not. How did you get the WX Bug Hunter? Are we going to get a Simla story? Are we going to gather around?
I mean, we can talk about Simla because Simla was great, but surprisingly, this might maybe it's surprising to a few of you who maybe don't know who me all that well, but um, I actually got into meteorology as a very young boy because I grew up in Arizona. So I lived in the Phoenix area, and you'd think, okay, how does a little kid suddenly fall in love with the weather when it's sunny all the time? And you're right, seems a little backwards, but um, it's really cool when a cloud comes by, or when you're in the shade, or when a rainstorm happens. You know, the thing that gives life, right? In the desert, storms and severe weather, clouds, all of that is more of a bringer of life than it is so much destruction as it is in other parts of the world, right? Um, Especially when I lived in Phoenix, we got to experience dust storms, we got to experience the monsoonal season. And I just remember being this young boy, just multiple times in my backyard, just watching clouds go by, whether it was at sunset or if it was in the afternoon and a big thunderstorm blew up over the Superstition Mountains off to the east. Just these types of things that I just thought was so cool that humanity has developed so much and it's able to accomplish so many things. Like we're even traveling through the air and even into space. And I always thought to myself, I thought it was so fascinating that a simple thunderstorm that moves over the city can bring it to a halt. That it's Mother Nature has the ability to stop humanity in its tracks at almost any given moment. And the storms themselves, the flashes of lightning, being in a dust storm, which if you've never been in a true haboob before, it's really fascinating because you get color changes if the light density if the light changes through the different amount of dust in the air. And I remember being in my backyard, jumping on my trampoline in a dust storm, full like thick dust storm, can't see 10 feet in front of you, and watching the light change and the color of the dust change depending on what was in the air, which probably wasn't a good thing, but hey, but it just I just had this fascination that it would be so cool to understand this seemingly rare but chaotic but beautiful force. Um, so I just from that point on, I just was always super fascinated with weather, and my parents would get me like these small little like weather books that would just like describe weather phenomena to me, and I just thought they were fascinating. And I also grew up in the early 2000s, late 90s to early 2000s. So um, storm chasing wasn't super big, but what did kind of come in the late 2000s was obviously the development of storm chasing as kind of like a more traditional hobby, as well as the show Storm Chasers. And so I grew up watching Reed Timmer, Tim Samaras, Sean Casey, on all the other groups, kind of loosely attached to them, going out and chasing. And I always thought that would be so cool to see a tornado for the first time. Because again, I'm this boy that never experienced winter, right? Like I just sat in the sun for most of my life until I moved to Colorado for the first time and finally got to see winter, like real winter. It got below freezing. It got below zero. We had snow in my backyard. The first winter I lived there, I had 2 feet of snow in my backyard from a big snowstorm. And I thought this was so cool that the world changes so much based off seasons. And it just kind of exponentially, slowly rolled from there. I moved across the country again to Texas and then to Iowa, where I would eventually see my first tornado near Dike, Iowa in 2009. And from that point, I was hooked. I knew it was one of those, like, for lack of better words, like one of those defining moments in your life that was, hey, this is what I'm meant to do. This is who I am, and I want to spend the rest of my life doing this, pursuing this. Um, and I got lucky seeing my first tornado. My first ever storm chase seeing a tornado is not a. I don't want to take any credit for it because what my family did. This was before smartphones were existing. My parents had our car radio and my dad had a new BlackBerry phone, the one that slid up to get the keyboard. So there's no internet on that phone. We had nothing. We just had the NWS over the radio and the local TV met telling us, "Hey, there's a tornado warning for this county," and we just drove to the middle of that county and sat there and waited. I think we were there for almost 2 to 3 hours before the storm that eventually produced the tornado rolled right over. We saw a couple of funnel clouds, so we just kind of sat there, but we were there in one spot for 45 minutes watching multiple storms kind of roll by until the last one came over and produced this really nice, skinny, long, very rope-like EF1 tornado. It immediately touched down, blew up a big old debris cloud around the base of it at the bottom, ripped the roof off a pig barn, and then recurved off into a cornfield and then dissipated. So that was like my first time seeing a tornado, which was really cool. So we got some family pictures next to the tornado, which was fun. We were about probably a mile away from it. And then secondly, watching it immediately destroy a building reinforced that fact of, oh, yeah, this is a force of nature. This isn't something to play around with. Um, I don't know if anyone's okay over there. The building just got annihilated. Someone could have just died in that, and I'm sitting here thinking this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life, right? So it was a very key moment in my life where I realized meteorology is what I want to do for the rest of my life and understand this chaotic force of nature. But I also want to chase it. But then I also want to make a difference because this just suddenly happened. Yeah, there was a tornado warning, but like it seemed to just materialize out of nothing. And suddenly a farmer lost essentially half of his property to this tornado almost in no time. So it was a kind of defining moment for me for why I decided to go and get a degree in meteorology, how it shaped how I chase storms and kind of shaped the way I view severe weather and my personal desire to try to make a difference in the world of meteorology and protecting life and property. So, yeah, I'd say that's how I got the WX bug. There were other chases in my future that kind of re-cemented that. Like Gabe mentioned, the Simla, Colorado supercell tornado event is one of them. Just one of those crazy life events that happens where everything, all the ducks are in a row, and you get lucky, and you see something truly magnificent. So,
Now,
yeah.
do you know, I don't think I've ever shared this with you. The reason why I always joke around with you about Simla is, believe it or not, you actually had a profound effect on me 5 years or so ago when I did that interview with you on Chaser Chat.
Hmm.
You were one of the first people I had on the podcast. So we'll say like definitely within the first dozen or so guests that I had on the podcast after I started it. Just you were so friendly on Twitter. I couldn't help but invite you on. And the passion that you spoke with when you were talking about that specific event
Hmm.
was something that I hadn't heard from anybody yet when they were discussing like a seminal storm chasing event that had shaped their entire experience. So that's why like it sticks in my mind. You know, it definitely stands out to me just as much as I'm sure it stood out to all of the people who listened to it. And by the way, if you were unaware, I actually have a separate podcast that's not connected to Storm Chaser coaching at all. It's called Chaser Chat. It's been on a hiatus for almost a year at this point, just because I've been so busy getting Storm Chaser coaching all up and running. But all the podcast episodes are evergreen, so you can go to YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and if you want to listen to that episode with Hunter, forgive me. I'm sure that I sound awful because I was just figuring out how I wanted to do the podcast and everything. But Hunter shares a great story over there. So just look up Hunter, folks, and Chaser Chat on whatever app you use. You can listen to that and you can hear the story yourself. So I just wanted to share that with you because I don't think I ever had that. It stuck out in my mind in a big way.
I mean, it is by far one of the coolest things I've ever experienced in life. So I could talk about it all day because just the level of like things just going right is unheard of on any of my chases. And I did a lot of things that I don't recommend other people do, like chasing without
I remember.
radar or, internet access for updated road networks or, just I had no information. I just had a camcorder, a paper map, and my eyes and drove and just had one of the strongest gut feelings that something was going to go down that day. And yeah, ended up seeing one of the most stupid storms I've ever seen in my life.
Yep,
And
yep.
yeah, seeing some epic tornadoes and losing my car to 4.5 inch hail. So got the whole experience.
All in one shot.
Pretty
Absolutely.
much. Pretty
The
much.
ups, the downs, and when you were saying earlier about just how amazing storms are, it reminded me. Did you see that viral tweet that was going around a couple of days ago? The weather
Which
is not small talk. Weather is
oh
vast,
yes.
beautiful, and
Yes.
mysterious. We are never really ready to talk about the clouds. I thought that was really cool.
I hate to tell you this, but the weather controls literally everything you do on a given day. So yeah, it's never not boring. Sorry.
Agreed. Might just be one of the like most interesting things you can talk about actually. So,
I got a very expensive piece of paper to say I'm qualified to talk about it.
all right. Great question, Hannah. Let's move to the next question, which is from Acronym. And he asks, or sorry, I'm going to get myself in trouble again. They ask, how do you learn all the different quirks and biases of forecast models? And before I toss that over to you, Hunter, I am going to say we have an incredible training module available in the Chaser Academy from Kyle Gillette. He does a great job really giving you the deep dive into forecast models, how they work, why they do what they do, how to apply them to storm chasing. So I would recommend you and anyone else who has a similar type of question to definitely check that out at some point down the road. But Hunter, if you could summarize maybe on a high level how exactly do you start to learn all those different quirks and biases? And I would guess part of it is you probably want to start with a small universe and then expand outwards. Like you don't want to be trying to incorporate every single model and every single ensemble into your toolkit to start. You probably want to figure out what each one is doing and then try to start to synthesize two and then three and then maybe four together and expand outward from there.
Yeah. Um, Models are a complicated thing because it's easy, or I guess I should say, the natural instinct is to believe them at face value. Because especially if you're getting into weather now, when we have all of this available information, technology, models, etc., you want to believe that this is as accurate as it is, or it is in fact accurate. When in which case they're actually entirely flawed and almost always significantly wrong. And that's kind of a hard thing to grasp because you think, okay, well, the her nailed this supercell over this area. Hey, it did a good job. And you're like, yeah, it did. What about the next run? What about the run before it? Or the one before that? And you just like can go through the steps of the trend of the model to see, was it just a fluke one run and that you remember, right? Confirmation bias for us as humans, we want to say, hey, this worked, check the box, but yet 99% of the rest of it didn't actually work. Was it actually a good forecast or just was it lucky and you cherry picked the right thing, right? So I completely agree with Gabe here. The correct way to handle models is you start with a small universe. You start with a single model. And I will say for everybody, the number one model you should start with is the her model. I, as a meteorologist, do not recommend anyone to use long range forecasting. I'm sure you've heard about the GFS or the ECMWF or the Euro model for,
Four, baby.
yeah, I know. So those two models are called global deterministic models. They are a single model and they cover a large range. Global means they cover a large range of spatial area. Usually, models like the HER are a lot more spatially limited to the US. Global models will cover much larger areas of the world, but they don't have as fine resolution. So things may get a little blurry, blend, and whatnot, and you don't get as much specifics or noise, but it's not as specific, but it generally gives you a pretty good idea. The number one gold standard for global models, obviously, is going to be the Euro model because it just has been performing the best. Doesn't mean it's an accurate model, it's performing the best generally going forward. And you can get lost in the weeds of like looking at the long range or whatnot. Generally, for me, a good rule of thumb, if you're going to look at those models, don't look at anything past 150 hours because the butterfly effect of one issue, and if it happens, that issue begins at the beginning of the run, it will then just diverge from the truth. So long range forecasting is very hard. And it's easy to go, oh, the Euro model at 300 hours has this big giant tornado outbreak, but the next one it's gone, right? So I try to, in terms of models, let's just bring it in. Let's get a really good hone, like a good focus. Let's stay with the her model. Let's stay within that 48-hour run period, right? That's 2 days that the model runs. And that 2 day period comes out 4 times a day during the 6Z, 12Z, 18Z, and 0Z. Those 4 runs will go the 48 hours. The her run in those intermittent hours will only go 18 hours into the future. The reason why I say we should start with this model is because it is the most dynamic model that we have if forecasting convection. And hey, we're storm chasers. We're looking for tornadoes. That's a convection. That's a storm. That's a thunderstorm. We want to find those. So let's focus on the her model. The her model is an amazing short range, very, very fine tuned model. It's a 3 kilometer grid model, and even you can get ones that are even shorter, which is really nice. But the computational power to produce that's ginormous. So generally, the traditional format is the 3 kilometer her. It is a great model, but it also has its issues. So understanding what is that issue, and I've said this already tonight, the her model, the number one issue with that model is it overmixes, dries out the boundary layer. Well, what's the boundary layer? The boundary layer is that about 1 kilometer layer above the ground that has frictional impacts with the surface. So the air in that layer generally is going to experience friction with the surface or transfer of lots of turbulent air flows, lots of circulations, eddies, etc. When you get above that boundary layer, the air is what's known as the free atmosphere above it, and it's less impacted by the surface. So the boundary layer itself is a very key layer because it's where we develop thunderstorms. The boundary layer is where we obviously live. It's where tornadoes happen. It's where all severe hazards happen. So it's very important to us as a species, right? Because we live here, we want to know about what's going on closest to the ground. The her model will sometimes overmix. And well, what does overmix mean? It means that the air will try to dry out and heat up probably more than it will in real life. What does that do? That can generate some complications, right? It's good at mixing, which can help you get vertical motion by allowing hot air to rise, but then it crushes your moisture and you're not able to actually produce clouds. You're not able to actually generate that thunderstorm in the first place. So I prefer to look at this model as the basis for a new person to start because it's the best model. It's the best one we have at this point. There are other models that are like called CAMs, and you'll find them. You'll find it like the RRFS. You'll find the NSSL models. Like if you're familiar with Pivotal, weather.cod.edu, or WeatherBell, you'll find these models very easily. And they all have their own specific quirks, but mastering the her model, I think, is the first step because then once you finish that one, move on to the 3 cam NAM or the NAM because it will have the exact opposite problem of it will be too cold in the boundary layer. It tends to produce a little too much moisture, holds on to cloud cover a little long, but what does it do well with? It does really well with shallow, cold air. So if you know a cold front is coming in, let's say it's, the end of the year, right? Let's say it's September, October, and you get a cold front coming out of Canada, that really first cold front that makes it feel like fall, right? The her model might struggle with the position of that cold front with time, but the 3 cam NAM and NAM itself, which are two separate models, by the way, they may actually accurately depict where that cold front may end up, which, hey, if you're trying to chase tornadoes, undercoating cold fronts are very bad. And so they all have their role to play in a forecast, and that's just, two models, right? The NAM and the her. But those two models are probably the best place to start once you kind of get a grasp of how those models work, how they behave, because understanding models is going to be very much a take the time to learn it. Don't just look at it and forget. Say, let's use these models to make a forecast, then pay attention to it throughout the day and see which model was more right. Sometimes the 3 cam NAM model is miles better than the her model. Sometimes vice versa. Maybe they both suck or they both nailed it. But the only way for you to know is if you make that conscious effort to say, hey, this is what it's saying. Let me look over the model trend, the previous hour run. Let me see how that's behaved. Has anything changed? Hey, at 12Z, balloons get launched, so the data should be better. So let's go check it out, right? And that's the kind of thinking with working with models. It's a lot of repetition. It's just knowing, hey, what's the issue with this model, but where does it do well? And just play with it. Don't be afraid to get your hands dirty with the model details. Definitely spend time working with Kyle's training lesson, working with models, because he does an excellent job. Generally, I think better than I could. He just understands models extremely well. So he's a very, very smart individual. So I highly recommend it. But then also know when to toss the models, throw them out the window, and just say, hey, I'm just going to stare at satellite until that dry line pops a storm. Sometimes it can be as in depth as you want it to be, or just as simple as you want it to be. So, yeah, models they're a complicated topic. It is a good question to ask, but the best thing I can just offer is just start with some one or two models, kick out all the everything else, consider it as noise, and play with it. Play with the data, play around with it. Don't be afraid to make a forecast and watch it fail, because that's okay. That's how you learn.
Amen to that. Failure is definitely the fast track to getting better at storm chasing and forecasting. I see Hannah
Absolutely.
said also Thomas, is it Grazoulis textbooks on tornado history? I think they did the significant tornado series. And I only say this to point out something. I've been sitting on the URL tornadohistory.com for like a year. I just couldn't believe that it was actually available. Seemed like an oversight on someone's part. At some point in the future, I'm going to do something with that, because that, I don't know, like tornado history seems like it has to get a lot of traffic on Google at least. So,
Probably. Sounds like a pretty safe search
yeah,
history.
that's a robust domain, I think. So, anyways, Hannah,
Good
if
to
you have
know.
any suggestions, what should I do with tornado history? So, all right, let's move on to the next question. I know there's a few hanging out in here. Weaponized autism, back with another question. This time it's serious though.
Ooh.
They say, I know actually zero about winter storms. What exactly do we look for to know if it's going to be a snowstorm system versus a regular storm system? So I think you're asking just regular snow versus some sort of severe storm system. Um, I guess we would say lake effect notwithstanding, because that's its own separate
Mhm.
beast. But in terms of troughs coming through, when would you expect to see just a regular run of the mill? It's going to snow, everything's going to be peaceful, versus you're looking at an actual snowstorm.
No, this is a really great question, and obviously, most people are going to want to focus on the convection side of things, right? They want to focus on the storms, supercells, tornadoes, but snowstorms are crazy dynamic. And to get big time snowstorms, you have to have a lot of things in meteorology really work. Sometimes, what I love about winter is it's the complete opposite of the summer, where the summer is like, we can go outside, we can have fun, live life, do activities. And the winter's like, I'm actively trying to kill you at every opportunity. you know so winter is a fascinating juxtaposition to summer. So for winter storms, the biggest thing you need to realize in a really basic term is you need generally three things. You need lift, you need moisture, and you need cold air. So first off, with lift, this is going to get into, and I believe Trey has a good module on this, about understanding the different levels of the atmosphere and how you can define lift, where you can find that. The synoptics in winter are very important because you don't have the traditional instability to provide vertical buoyancy, right? That up force. So we have to get it through other means. So jet dynamics, like at 300 millibars, are going to be very, very significant for understanding where zones of lift are. In snowstorms, that left exit region is going to often be behind the surface low, which is a great thing because it provides tons of rising air. Rising air, that we know, it will cool and condense. That produces precipitation. If the depth of that profile, getting into point number 3, right, cold air, if the depth of that profile is cold all the way through, you produce snow. The colder that profile is overall, the more likely you are to generate more and more snowfall. Snow is honestly, a very simple thing. As long as you're staying within a certain ratio, which, if I'm remembering correctly, you want to stay between minus 12 and minus 17 degrees Celsius through a mid-layer portion of the atmosphere. That is the dendritic growth zone, where you get those big, fluffy snowflakes. You want that zone to be as deep as possible, because if you're generating the biggest snowflakes in that zone, you don't want your ice nuclei to fly through that zone too fastly, right? They won't generate enough accretion of ice themselves or coalescence with other frozen raindrops, right? So you want that to reside in that zone for as long as possible. So you want it to generate the biggest snowfall. So that's a little bit of meteorology to say, hey, you want some cold air, you want it to be as cold as possible, and you want to get that zone of lift to help generate that precip, right? Air that is cold is very stable. So it doesn't want to go vertical. It generally wants to sit at or sink closer to the ground. But if you're able to pump moisture into that zone, pump heat into that zone, and rise it, which is usually going to be denoted in the 700 to 400 millibar zone. That's generally where we look for that moisture transport from the south. If you're getting into more of the meteorology details for how these mid-latitude cyclones produce these big snowfall swaths, you'll get this big shielded zone on the north side of low pressure systems. And that's where we get that lift. That moisture overrides the warm front, gets lifted, cools, condenses, falls out. And if the depth of that profile is very cold, you'll generate snowfall. The thing that you don't want to see is any warm layer aloft, right? You don't want any part of your profile to be at 32 or above because you'll start eating into those snowfall ratios.
Warm nose.
Something like this. I got a big one of these. You want to avoid those. You want to avoid those in your profile. And it's very simple. They just like imagine my hand is the temperature profile and this is the dew point. You don't want your profile to look like this because then that means air will struggle to rise through that layer. It's like a cap. Same thing happens in environments that are in the summer and trying to get thunderstorms. That just means as precip falls through that layer, it will warm. That's really bad for snowfall. We don't want that. You may generate back to rain. And if it goes back to freezing, you generate sleet, grapple, or freezing rain, which is other winter types, right? So as long as you're maintaining a lot of lift, which again, go check out Trey's module for understanding where lift is found in the atmosphere and how we find it as meteorologists and chasers. Do we get lots of moisture, right? We want tons and tons of moisture, as much as the atmosphere can hold. What does that mean? The green line on a sounding is as close to the red line as possible because that means the atmosphere at that point is saturated. It means it has lots of moisture, it can't hold any more, so it tries to precipitate it out, right? And then obviously that the entire depth of the atmosphere needs to be cold. So the perfect snowstorm my favorite are the Colorado lows. They're the storm systems that sweep across the Intermountain West, like across California. Big old trough develops in at 500 millibars across Colorado. The low pressure develops on the lee side of the mountains or the east side, and that low rapidly deepens in pressure, explodes in pressure basically, where the pressure rapidly falls. It immediately pulls moisture up from the south very rapidly. Cold air from the north piles in from Cheyenne, Wyoming, and northward, and develops this really tight, compact system of really dense cold air on the north and a lot of moisture being funneled in. If you get those kind of dynamics, that is how we get those big time snowstorms. Granted, that is kind of the model. You can get types of snowstorms that can be very different. Like sometimes, especially in Colorado, if you get upslope flow for a long period of time, you can generate huge snowfall. But generally for, let's say, the eastern 2/3 of the US, the major way you're going to get snowfall is through these very strongly dynamic systems coming through. There's a lot you can go into snowfall forecasting and understanding how snowstorms kind of get going and what to look for. But generally, just follow the three basic rules. Are we getting a lot of moisture being funneled in? Are we getting a lot of lift in that same zone? And is there cold air in that zone? If you overlap the three, you're probably going to get a lot of snow.
Anna wants to know about a possible cold core setup in Illinois on Sunday. I see there is a sounding posted, but it's looking like we might be lacking in the Cape department. If you want to take a look at that and then maybe offer up any insight that you have.
Yeah, let's take a look. And actually, I'm going to share my screen because we can do that. Give me a moment.
I think someone is wish casting a cold core event in their local area on Sunday.
I love it. On Sunday, and this was in Illinois, correct?
Saturday, sorry.
Saturday.
Yes, Saturday
okay.
in Illinois. Yep.
Saturday 18Z. Okay.
I mean that's is that the Forever Meso photograph?
It's a really dang good photograph, that's for sure. If you were unstable, I would definitely expect tornadoes with this type of photograph. But remember, tornadoes and supercells are obviously a two-part thing. You need the instability, right. You need the shear. You have the shear. So the question is, are we going to get the right instability? So if y'all can pay attention to the nice pivotal screen I got going up here, let's take a little focused. Actually, we're going to do this first. We're going to look at 300 millibars. And let's see what's going to go on Saturday. So obviously this is a bit far out. We're looking at the ECMWF on the 18Z model run. So we're going to take a look. We're going to see immediately we have a nice kind of trough digging in here, a little bit of a low kind of tucked into this flow here. Nice little jet streak coming across. And by Saturday, well, this is Friday. Okay, so we get that system, it ejects off, and then you get another stronger jet streak, much stronger jet streak, with a little bit more developed trough as well. Very positively tilted, so very early in its development stage. By Saturday, it starts to impinge across the region, and if we do our jet dynamics right, we draw that nice oval shape. Can't really draw with the Discord overlay, but imagine a nice oval shape over the strongest part of this, of the jet streak, which seems to be about here along the Iowa-Missouri border. That left exit region seems to be over that Iowa, Northern Illinois zone, and then the right entrance region, the other zone of vertical lift, is going to be back over Colorado, Kansas, and Nebraska. So not relevant, so we can just avoid that. Seems like we are going to get some type of lift across the zone, obviously, as this jet streak comes in. So, hey, we're checking the box. We got lift. At 500 millibars, I'd like to see a little bit stronger of a well-developed trough at this point. And you actually do get a little bit of a short wave, if you notice. The main trough is very positively tilted, but you do get, as it becomes Sunday, a little short wave right in here. You can see through the kind of curves of the lines here, a little spoke of the main short wave coming through. So seems like we have a little bit maybe favored zone here across Northern Illinois. So lift-wise, seems like we're getting something. But again, this is all shear based, right? We're looking at lift, shear, things like that. 850, the first thing I want to look at is, do we have a low-level jet? Obviously, I would expect one with how strong the dynamics are aloft. First system swings by, next one comes rolling in, and Saturday 18Z looks like about, surface low kind of here across northeast Iowa. We got a nice jet core, 45 to 50 knots flowing in, so yeah, there's reasonable belief that, maybe there's a warm front that drapes northwest to southeast here, and a bit of a cold front draped like this from the pinnacle point of Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, drapes southwestward. Immediately off of this look, I'm very curious about this zone right at the kind of impinged point where the cold front and warm front meet, and the occluded boundary goes up into the low itself. That would be kind of the initial thing I would be very interested about, just based off of that alone. But let's look at 850 millibar moisture. Are we getting moisture here? I guess this will be temperature. So we'll just use this as a proxy. Let's see how warm we're getting. Okay, in the morning, looks like we have a little bit of a, I can't say an EML because this is at 850, but looks like we're getting a little bit of heat and moisture, likely getting into this zone as we see temperatures kind of warm up a little bit, 5, 6, 7 degrees Celsius, kind of in that pinch nose zone. Let's look at 700 millibars at temperature, see are we getting any instability like a cap or anything. And obviously this is winter, so we obviously are going to see lower values, right? Fall, winter has much lower values. And we're not really getting too much of a cap, so any instability that forms will probably instantly generate thunderstorms. Not necessarily a good thing, but quite cold aloft, so I'd expect definitely more of a cold core situation. And actually, I never even checked this. The way we actually know if it's officially a cold core is we look at the 500 millibar temperatures, because we want to see, one, a closed off circulation, like this up here. As you can see, it's completely closed off. The height line is completely circular. There's no trough. And based off of this, I would not officially consider this a cold core because this is not a closed off. It's kind of that open wave, that height lines don't fully close off. It tries to close off by 0Z, so it's trying to, but temperatures definitely meet that threshold. Generally, I would consider minus 20 degrees Celsius at 500 millibars is a good threshold. So that checks the box, but the height lines themselves don't officially make it a cold core, but it's close enough, and we'll just consider it a possibility.
If I could, real quick, Hunter, ask a question that I have personally, and I think maybe some other people are wondering. Is the thing that makes it a cold core event once you have that closed low is that because it is a closed low in the upper levels, that it pulls the surface low sort of closer to being vertically stacked with the upper level low, and that means that the temperatures aloft are a lot colder than they might otherwise be.
Yes, absolutely. You nailed it. Cold cores, if you especially the at 500 millibars, you want that nice closed height lines because that means it's a fully mature system. At least that's how convention has decided that that's when we call it a cold core event. And those tornadoes that exist in a cold core event are going to be found pretty much underneath that low at 500 millibars. So it's pretty easy. If you get that closed low and it's very cold aloft, like I said, minus 20 degrees Celsius or colder, you definitely check both those boxes. And even here at 850, you're fully closed off. Just 500, it's just a little hair off. So I'm fine calling it essentially a cold core situation. But technicalities. I'm a meteorologist. I'm in charge of boxes, so you have to keep up with the definitions. But
Right
but
on.
it's essentially almost there. And you are getting a little bit of moisture. Again, it is fall, right? So we're not expecting huge moisture. It's just, are we getting enough? So by 21Z, 3 p.m., because we're now standard time, in Illinois, it looks like I'd be very interested in this like northwest Illinois zone. Again, if the surface agrees. So notice again my forecast process, right? We start at the top and work our way down. And we've already figured out the area that I would personally favor the most is going to be right along the river into northwest Illinois. Now let's look at the first thing I'll look at is surface dew points because I want to see what's that moisture looking like. Friday's system swings by and we see not a really good sign, a little bit of a trouble here because that first system gets a really impressive moisture pull northward. 50-degree dew points in November, that far north, are fantastic. So don't be afraid that, oh, it's only 52 degrees Fahrenheit. Is that enough moisture? Absolutely. In fall, winter, it is absolutely enough moisture to see tornadoes. In fact, the coldest tornado I've ever seen was a tornado in eastern Iowa back in 2023 in January. And the surface profile was 50 over 46. So you can get tornadoes if everything else kind of falls in line. So
That's
based off of
crazy.
this, I know it was kind of a
Gotta
fun
put a
tornado to
sweatshirt
witness.
on that tornado. Jeepers.
Yeah, it snowed
Nuts.
in the RFD. It was snowing in the RFD. It was kind of nuts. It was kind of a fun little tornado in
Yeah, it's
Iowa in
bonkers.
January. So getting back to this, just really quick, surface, we're getting dew points in the upper 40s, maybe at most. So definitely a little moisture starved. That first system swinging through really puts a damper on this. If this first system didn't have as much of a moisture pool and strong cold front, then this system would definitely be very significant. Because as you can see, right up there, you're getting these backed southeasterly winds right up underneath that surface low pressure, which is a automatic, hey, stupid, go here type of forecast. But let's go ahead and pull a sounding here, just right on that little interface. And the first thing I obviously am going to point out is the complete lack of any virtual instability. Shear, fantastic. Lots of deep layer shear, lots of low level curvature. So I would say off of this Euro model run, I don't anticipate necessarily tornadoes off of this initial look. But again, the global models, an important, I guess, follow up for the model thing, global models will really struggle with instability in the long range. And again, this is hour 123. So this is, 7 days in advance almost, 6 days in advance. Or I guess it's Saturday, so 5 days now, 5, 6 days. So it's quite a while, right? All our shorter range models haven't even gotten close to touching this. But based off of the upper level pattern, the way things look kinematically, I would definitely be paying attention to this to see if the NAM or the HER model, as this gets closer, picks up on any instability, because that is how these events go. You'll have the Euro kind of hint at something dynamic, but not very thermodynamically impressive. And as you get towards those shorter range models, which tend to handle that moisture, that low level moisture better, then we start seeing instability ramp up. And oftentimes, I've seen these situations that look impressive dynamically, but kind of suck thermodynamically, suddenly have 2000 cape and we're off to the races and we see tornadoes underneath that low. So, not saying this obviously happens, that would be bad forecasting on my part, But this, I would say, let's pay attention to it, see how the day kind of falls out. For those who want to practice working their models, this I think would be a really great thing to watch for all of us there. Very easy. We want to focus on, are we getting instability, getting moisture? How's that shear looking? Let's apply some of the training modules that Trey has produced and that Kyle has produced. And let's see if we can try to figure out if this day is going to produce tornadoes or not. More than likely, it probably won't, but we're here for the exercise, right? So I'd say good question. Looks like probably no tornadoes yet, but just for funsies, because I like to have fun with this, let's see, what does the Euro model try to produce? And it does look like you do develop thunderstorms in that zone of lift that we discussed, right? This is not surprising because we already determined there was lift there. Boom, we're seeing thunderstorms there right along that warm frontal zone. So I'd be very interested in like the Davenport area and maybe points northward along that occluded boundary if so exists. So yeah, I'd say keep your eye on this and feel free to at me in the future if we want to discuss this more.
Do not at me, bro. All right. So
Next question.
I think we got time for one more question here. Actually, got a couple more questions we'll grab here, but yeah, if you guys want to get in a final question, I'll leave the chat open basically for questions until 9:02, which is a minute from now. 9:03. I won't make you guys rush, but yeah, get your questions in now. Let's see.
Coming.
So the Hemolizer 3000. I just love that name. They want to know what makes lake effect snowstorms a different ball game than other winter storms.
I think that is a great question. So it is essentially a different mechanism that generates lake effect. You will never see lake effect snows during an active trough, like the actual storm system itself. But where you get them is when that storm system passes over off to the east. You get a couple of things that happen. One, you get advection of very cold air. That is going to be the key thing, right? We want that profile to be cold and as deeply cold as possible, right? We want that whole profile below freezing to generate snowfall. Secondly, what is a lake in winter? A body of water. A body of water is essentially permanent dew points just sitting there. And obviously, it takes a long time for a lake to freeze. So that just means it steams, right? When cold air moves across a warm body of water, it will steam. That is instability. That instability can get lifted, and especially in very cold air, steam will want to rise and go vertically. And in a zone where there is very cold air, you generate snowfall. Now, that just means, hey, it starts to snow. Does that mean we're getting the absolute monsters that, like, say, Buffalo, New York has to deal with? No. The key feature here is actually a very simple force called friction and convergence. Friction, obviously, across a body of water is going to be very minimal, so all the wind is just going to funnel it across. But when a passage of a storm system, sometimes you'll get converging winds from off of a body of or a landmass onto the body of water. That can create zones of convergence. And what we learned from Trey in the training modules, low-level convergence means rising motion. Rising motion generates precipitation, and if you're already in a very deeply cold layer and it's extremely moist, you will generate snowfall. So this is how we develop those thin snow bands across the Great Lakes. It's because the water is super warm, we're able to get converging winds across that lake, and then it just fire hoses straight out of location. And within a mile or two inland, as long as the air coldness doesn't change, right? The temperature doesn't fluctuate too drastically, you can get these super intense bands of snowfall. And as you're mixing down that snowfall, right, it's going to pull strong winds down. In the winter, we have really strong winds aloft. So if you have strong air flowing through, stuff falling through it, it creates drag. That air gets deflected downwards, and if it's converging to a single point, you basically generate like a 1 mile wide, full on mega blizzard. And if that sits over you for a long period of time, you can have feet of snow pile up rapidly. So if you remember the last couple of years, there have been some pretty significant lake effect snowstorms. And it's been because of those things, right? Simple features, very cold air, converging winds, and a moisture source. all those three things combined with very strong winds aloft deflects it back into the ground, and you get these super mega, very localized blizzards where I'm sure you've heard of totals at over 50 inches, 60, 70, 80, 90, pushing 100 inches of snowfall in a 24 to 48, maybe 72-hour period. Just absurd amount of snowfall because that band just doesn't move until the pattern changes. That snow band isn't going to go anywhere. So it can be pretty devastating to some communities, but thankfully, they those communities that have to deal with lake effect snows, they know that's part of living there, so they have the facilities to generally combat it. But at some point, like I talked about, why I love weather, meteorology can just say no, screw you, you're shutting down, and completely shuts down the city. So it can be lots of fun.
Yeah, there's nothing else on planet Earth, going back to what we were talking about earlier, about how much weather affects life. There's nothing else on planet Earth that can literally just bring cities, states, entire regions to a complete standstill.
Alrighty. Next question.
I think that actually is everything. We just have some people in chat who are asking about the new Category 6 hurricanes. I wonder if you have any opinion on that before we bounce out of here for the night.
So Saffir Simpson scale goes to 5 people. I don't know what to tell you. Like, just I think I made a response tweet to somebody earlier that what is worse than catastrophic? What is worse than all-encompassing absolute destruction? Right? There's nothing above that because it's just gone. So, in the sense of tornadoes as well as hurricanes, because it's a wind-based scale, right? It doesn't factor in anything else. At some point, things just don't survive anymore, and it's just horrifically destructive. So having a category above, say, EF5 for tornadoes, or a category above hurricanes, category 5, like what benefit do you get? Right? There's no additional benefit of having that higher category. Saying like, oh, but this hurricane, like Melissa, right? That's the hurricane that's spawned this kind of discussion. Is okay, it was a 185-mile-an-hour hurricane, possibly even higher. We'll see what reanalysis wants to say about it. I personally believe it was at least 190-mile-an-hour hurricane, which is just absurd. Like, yeah, that gets put in an upper echelon alone. Do we give it an own category? I don't think so, because then that just means the people who deal with landfalling hurricanes are going to just care less about the category 5, right? The moment you introduce a higher category, they'll just say, oh, at least it isn't a 6, right? You immediately start destroying any possibility of people taking rational thought, right? This gets into the social science of how people interact. If I told you an EF0 is heading for your house, are you going to panic? Probably not. If I told you an F5 is heading for your house, would you panic? Probably. That's the weight it carries. Changing that system causes serious warning and people's ability to think rationally in disaster situations. And yeah, there are going to be some upper echelon events. Like we have 300-mile-an-hour tornadoes or 185-mile-an-hour hurricanes, the strongest landfalling hurricane in the Atlantic that we know of, right? It ties the best that we've ever recorded. Does that mean it deserves another category? No, because it's just absolute. It's an absolute monster. That is all it's going to be. It's just an absolute beast of a category 5, and that's where it belongs to be. So, good question. It's a good discussion.
Amen to that. Hunter, thank you so much for joining us here. And Hemalizer, I see what you're saying. He would love all those funny thumbnails of him. Yes, agreed. He absolutely thinks those are hilarious. I thought you were saying he would like the discussion about a Category 6 hurricane, and I can unequivocally say that no, Trey would roll his eyes, gasp very loudly and visibly, and then he would just move on to the next question. So,
Valid.
all right. Well, thank you all very much for joining us here for the office hours this week. We actually are going to have a second office hours this week, a special episode that we're going to open up for everybody on Thursday night. I already scheduled the event. It is in the office hours channel, so check that out. The office hours we did last week on Thursday, Hunter, with myself, you, Ethan, and Kyle. We had some issues with the technology we were using, and it actually didn't get recorded, even though we were recording the entire time.
Oh
So
no.
That was a great discussion too. I was so bummed that we weren't able to actually put that up on demand for all of the members, but we're going to do a second office hours this week to make up for it. Trey's going to be the one who is answering the questions, um, taking all the questions on Thursday. So that'll be a good time. And Hunter, of course, as with every one of these and with all of our coaches, you're always welcome to stop by and jump in the conversation if you'd like.
Happy if I'm available.
All right, everyone. You have a wonderful night. We'll see you later.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Appreciate your questions.